This Friday, and Kyle Brown joins me for that press review. And Kyle, you're starting off with a harsh look at some of capitalism's villains. Tell us more.
That's right. Well, in today's Independent, there are a number of articles that criticize the super rich, the CEOs of this world, and indeed the elite across the board. And we have in one article, if you go to the Independent today, you'll see a lovely thing called the hypocrisy of the wealthy. And it's very critical of the high banking sector, as we've seen earlier this week throughout the media. But this one in particular rails against the moralizing hypocrite. The blogger here uses a few examples, and he uses one that you might not be ready for. If you're ready for this, I'll be surprised, because he chooses the hero of many charity campaigners, and that's Bono of U2. Now, he says the hypocrisy lies in this, that while he publicly, very publicly, proclaims the merits of giving to aid, giving to charity with one hand, with the other, he's actually doing everything he can, or at least U2 in general, is doing everything they can to minimize the tax that they pay. And the whole point of this article is to say that, you know, as they give to charity and they call on others to do so, they're saying, in fact, that, you know, it's okay to move their money elsewhere. And what U2 did was actually move part of its tax liabilities to the Netherlands outside of Ireland. Well, the point he's saying is, well, that undermines the very tax base that we're supposed to be using to contribute to the alleviation of poverty. And in fact, if you recall back in 2006, it was part of the big move to make poverty history, if you remember, the concerts of which U2 was a big part. And it was in that very year that they moved part of their tax liability to a different country. And so the blogger here says, listen, that's taking with one hand and giving with the other.
Okay, well, perhaps unsurprisingly, The Economist has rather a different view of powerful bosses in this week's issue.
Well, in The Economist, we see a lovely graphic of a large giant there, reminiscent of Gulliver's Travels, if anyone can recall the 1700s novel where the giant was, you know, taken down and pinned down by the miniature people in Lilliput, I think it was called. And basically, it's a reference to the fact that over the past several years, they've diminished in stature, our corporate elites, our corporate giants of today. And in fact, in 2000, their average job tenure it went from 8% back then in 2000. 8 years. They had an 8-year job tenure. It would typically end after 8 years. Now, it's just 6.5 today. 6.5 years. So in other words, they're lasting much less long in their posts. And that's just one measure of their relative puissance, their relative strength. Now, what's happened now as well, another measure that The Economist uses is the number of corporate execs actually chairing their own boards. And The Economist says it's kind of like a schoolboy marking his own exam papers. And they say, actually, that too has declined. Almost 50% of the companies, 50% of CEOs were doing that kind of thing, running their own boards. Now it's just 12%. So The Economist says, listen, you know, it's all good to rail against the corporate giants, but in fact, they're already being taken down quite a peg.
Okay, well, perhaps some corporate giants being taken down over in the US, where, of course, President Obama has been standing up to big oil, perhaps supposedly slighting the bosses of those companies. And that's being covered in the Huffington Post.
That's right. Now, the Huffington Post sees it very much as being Obama being courageous, standing up to big oil. But in fact, and I'll get to the kind of other way of looking at it in a second. But for now, it's enough to say that, you know, environmentalists do have something to cheer about. They protested in front of the White House for many weeks. And now here they have a relative success because it's been put off altogether. But other people are saying, the National Post in particular in Canada, conservative newspaper, saying, listen, this isn't the end. In fact, it's just been delayed. In fact, because the U.S. is far too dependent upon oil, especially from relatively safe, secure, friendly countries like Canada. And so they'll need the oil far too much to give up on it.
And just briefly, finally, the results are in for just how effective that online protest was against that possible US legislation about internet piracy.
Yes, very briefly. Obviously, a lot of public anger against this bill that it's known as SOPA in the House of Congress. It would effectively block access to websites that are seen to be pirates or vehicles of piracy, online piracy. And the idea really is to try to curb that. But protesters are saying it goes far too far. It's an infringement of online freedom. And in fact, the opposition has worked. A lot of people are saying anyway. 162 million visits to Wikipedia just yesterday, 5 times its normal amount for that day. And opposition in Washington is actually growing to the bill. So they're saying it was a success.
Okay, and The Atlantic, of course, saying it was the biggest day of online protests in the English